Hi guys, welcome to the last in our 8-part series on drawing the figure, the anatomy of style, in association with ImagineFX magazine. Now, it's been great making these movies and writing these articles over 8 weeks. It's terrific always to go over my thoughts and insights into art, as much for me as it is for you. Because we often sit down and ask ourselves questions about art, why we do it, and what's its purpose. And sometimes into our career, people might convince us there is no purpose to it, or that it's silly, or something like that, or along those lines. And it's more of a child's occupation than an adult's. And that's the sad thing about it, really, about art, in most cases, that it's taught in primary school, and it's kind of left there most part through our education, when really it's incredibly important. If we look at the great cities and cultures of the world, they're defined by their art and their artists and their literature and their film, and it's all the arts. We're more than just a species scratching around the dirt for truffles. We're doing something. We're showing our view of the world. We're showing our humanity. We're expressing our emotions, and in that way we touch other people with those thoughts and those pictures. And it doesn't get any more important than that. It connects us all. Okay, now that's a bit heavy, or seems to be, but it actually is a comfort to me to know that this thing that I do, this thing I've devoted my life to, is actually an important thing. And I want you to know that it's important as well, in case you ever have any doubts in that area. And the reason I'm talking about that is the last episode, and it's one of the big questions we ask later as artists, and we don't ask it soon enough, I don't think. Why are we doing this? Alright guys, now with that in mind, I'm going to get into this last drawing and make that very point. I'm going to make a beautiful drawing that says something about our human emotions, and hopefully it'll also inform you as far as craft and technique is concerned, which is also important. And we'll cover all of the 8 weeks in this last drawing and go over the things we've learned. Again, learning sometimes comes in a big chunk and on big undigested lump, and we forget everything we've learned almost as soon as we've learned it. So one of the main things about art and technique, or what I call love and devotion, is to surrender to the fact that it's going to be tough and hard and long, and we have to keep at the coalface until we get to where art becomes a more natural expression and less of a task. So we're going to go over these disciplines again throughout this lesson. So sit back with me and let's get started. Alright guys, here we go. I've got my charcoal stick sharpened into a triangular witch's hat, so the edge can be very sharp. I can turn it on any side and get various thicknesses. And using my gestural hand, of course, that gives me all the fluidity that I need to draw these long lines with confidence. Now we've got the beautiful Katie here, and she's doing a fantastic job as usual. She's so gestural, and I'm very, very lucky to have these incredible models of Katie and Alana that have worked with me over these 8 issues to be in my orbit. It's just incredible. These are 2 models they're world class. You go to New York or Paris, and you'll just not get their quality matched. They're just fantastic. So very lucky am I, and sometimes I wonder if it's this world really exists, or have I conjured it, that it can all work so well for me. So let's go over these disciplines one at a time. We go to college or we study, and it's so intense that we practically forget everything we were taught as we walk out the door. And what we want to do as artists is keep that knowledge fresh, and keep those skills fresh, and continue to learn and draw all the time. And in that way, we'll eventually get close to at least the nirvana of drawing for pleasure and drawing with confidence. You know, it looks like I'm drawing with incredible confidence here, but I'm always very aware of the fact that this is a discipline as well as a joy. And so I'm not throwing anything out or running on just instinct. Instinct's a very important thing as well. I have to keep the fact alive that I'm not copying, for instance, and keep the idea alive that it's important for me to be free as I draw with confidence, or the illusion of confidence, because the whole time I'm drawing I'm very aware that this is also a basket full of disciplines, and a basket full of skills that can easily slip away from us if we fade out or lose our train of thought. So this is high concentration balanced with a confident hand, and we become more confident as we draw more. So let's look at the fluidity idea. So I'm drawing from one side to the other. I'll just stop for a second and explain that I was sharpening my charcoal stick there and saving the powder, and wiping onto the tissue stops me getting a big black mark on the first hit. So very important that you clean it off on your tissue first, the charcoal. And now we're straight back into it. So the charcoal was getting a little blunt there for the edges I wanted. So let's look at a few disciplines here. Now we've got let's go back to the second part of the series, the contrapposto. And this is a very obvious contrapposto pose here. And I would have liked to have used this for the issue too, but I wanted to make sure that there was a male and female figure drawn in the series. So we have the chance to do something beautiful here due to contrapposto. Now the idea of rhythm is very constant here, and I'm chasing rhythms. I'm going from one side to the other rather than going down one side and then coming up the other side. You'll see that I'm constantly, if I'm drawing a hip, I'll go over to the other side and draw the other side of the hip. Drawing the rib cage, go over to the other side. Now let's go back to issue 1. Issue 1 was drawn from photographs, and the problems with that. And you can see an immediate problem with this photograph. So beautiful is that pose Katie's doing there. We've got a tangent. We've got an arm that's coming out to the left. It looks broken. It looks like it doesn't belong to the body. Now we know it does because Katie threw that pose and that's her arm. But I'm not going to draw it in there. So I'm making a decision. I'm making an artistic choice to say that yes, that arm goes behind the back, but the hand doesn't come out that far. So I've had to do two things. I've had to eliminate the hand and also change the shoulder shape just a touch so that it would make sense that that arm could be hidden down the back. The way that arm is pulled forward with Katie, you can really see the torque of it because it's very flexible. That arm's come right out at that angle because that shoulder's been locked around. So if I left the shoulder locked like that and took the arm out, it would look very odd. So you got to think all the time. So drawing simple to complex, another one of our disciplines. Instead of trying to draw every one of those fingers to begin with, I'm just going to break that hand into two parts. Now at the knuckle part, we've got half the length of the hand, and then that's all the way to the fingertips for the second half. But because the fingers are closed at that point, then we have a quarter of the size going back. So aware of proportions to some extent. And I'm not going to try and idealize this pose. I'm going to try and make it a little bit more fluid, and that doesn't necessarily mean we got to make everybody really tall with our 8 heads high idea. So I'm gonna make this a little bit more natural, because if we've got a shorter figure, we get more fluidity we get more gesture. A long figure can be very, very blocky, and I want a lot of fluidness in this figure. Now I've entitled this piece the Stormbringer. I want to have some kind of magical flow throughout this. The idea that someone can conjure a storm, it's a beautiful idea. And we all know that a storm is a metaphor for, troubled times. And so the very name Stormbringer can conjure up all kinds of stories. Is she good? Is she bad? Usually bad, isn't it? But I want to complicate the issue more so by making her more beautiful, more playful. Maybe she conjures storms and is unaware of the destruction that she wreaks. And that's, once again, the great thing about an ambiguous title, is that it gives the viewer a chance to imbue their own story. And I love that. So there's an idea of an idea. The idea of art is to show our view of the world and to start a conversation. And I hope that all my drawings do this. If we just draw pretty pictures, that's fine, but it's not as deep and meaningful and long-lasting as a picture that conjures up a conversation or an idea of what's happening, what the person was thinking, or what the person was doing, and what it all meant. We talk about the Mona Lisa still today. What was she thinking? What was that enigmatic smile all about? What was the secret? And it keeps us talking all this time, hundreds of years later. Okay, so once we have, and you can see now, we're looking at the disciplines now of structure here. And structure is a simplified idea of anatomy. So I've left the first stage there to show you how simple the complex works. That first stage was all about finding the rhythms and the basic turn. And I've turned this form more. If you look at the center part there where we just started, and then look at Katie's pose. And Katie's pose was fantastic, but I thought it could have more bend to it. All the way up from the knee to the shoulder of Katie in the photograph is very straight. It's almost a straight edge apart from the rectus femoris of the thigh bulging forward a little bit. That could almost be a straight line all the way up to the shoulder. And we've also got a tangent too, where the shoulder starts and then the arm comes forward, and that tricep skims right along the edge of the rib cage where the teres major and latissimus are. And a tangent is really when lines converge and destroy the illusion of depth in a picture, and that's what's happening there. Everything's gone very flat. So I want to first of all bend more, like we see in the center start of this joint, and create more of a rhythm down that side of the body and unstraighten it. So you can see I pushed the hip out more, I pushed the 10th rib out more, and I brought the shoulder out further, so that we have overlapping forms rather than forms that seem to be in one flat plane. And by that way I've killed the tangents that were a problem. And a lot of my art is killing tangents. The more complicated a picture becomes, the more tangents are invariably going to happen, because more lines are going to converge. By the very nature of backgrounds and foregrounds, we're going to get lots of that happening. Alright, so I'm getting into the foot here, and once again, the foot can be a hard thing to draw, as can the hand be, as we know, and the way to tackle all of those things is to make them as simple as possible. Think of a shoe rather than a foot with toes on it, and then add the toes, for instance. Like with the breasts here, you can see that they're one of the last things I usually draw, because I want to make sure they're placed on that rib cage properly, and then I put the small stuff inside the big stuff. And very aware too of that accordion shape of the breasts pushing down toward the obliques, and the obliques pressing against the hips there, and making sure that they're not parallel lines. These lines are coming out and in an accordion fashion, where they're getting wider on the stretch side of the body, the other side, and coming in closer on the pinch side. And that's why I always draw the breast as one shape or one line going across, so we can feel that. So getting into the face now, the head. And you know, we all have our little foibles, and I tend to draw the head a little too small sometimes. So, but that's not a bad way to go, because a big head can look quite odd. We don't want that. So I'm getting them tight there, and of course, when we start getting like that, we start getting structural, and with structure comes a stiff drawing if we're not too careful. So as I draw the head, I usually want to come outside of that a little bit. Every once in a while I'll go to another part of the body and go back to the head again. So anything that seems tight, I'll try not to stay there too long, because if I do and come back to another part later, I'll have that sort of stiff structural hand still working. So you can see now that I'm changing a few things. Like if you look at Katie, she's got those 4 fingers. The little fingers coming out at a different angle, which is great, but the other 3 are almost mimicking it in some way, and it takes away a gesture. I want to change that index finger to be a little longer and just make it a little bit more elegant. And I find by drawing the hand from the outer fingers first and then adding the thumb is usually a pretty good way to go, and then put the rest of the fingers in. It stops you drawing a hand that's too big. And same with the face as well. You know, try to stay within the parameters that you originally drew. Otherwise, when you start putting the nose, mouth, and eyes in, you start to draw the head bigger to accommodate all those small things, and it just naturally grows and grows. So we always end up with a big head if we're not careful. And once again, that's why I usually start with a smaller head. Okay, so in the magazine you'll see that I've written about the ideas behind art, and I've talked about my theory of love, devotion, and surrender, and we need those 3 things. And the love I always had, I was very lucky that way. I loved art, and that geared my art for a long time. That kept my art going. You know, I was running on love, and the devotion wasn't a problem either. I was willing to devote myself to many hours of practice. That was easy to do, because I loved the artwork so much. One fed the other. But the one thing I think is the toughest for all of us, and it's the one thing that kills a lot of people's ambition and stops them being artists and sends them into a different career, is the surrender part. And it's never talked about. It's just an idea I have, and I believe it to be true, is that when people find that it's very hard, they won't surrender. They'll do a different kind of surrender. They'll just give up. That's just giving up. But I believe that if you surrender to the fact that it's going to be tough, automatically that it becomes less so, because you've realized that. You know, we start art because we love it, and then it becomes a job and it becomes a chore if we're not careful. And we sometimes go, well, I thought this was going to be fun, and it's not. You know, it's deadlines. It's frightening sometimes when you're up against you've got a contract in your hand and people are expecting these great things from you, and all of a sudden you can't produce it because you don't love it like you used to. And so, for me, learning to surrender to the fact that it was going to take time actually freed me up, and also it freed me up to practice more, because I knew now that I had all this extra time that I've given myself, because I knew it was going to take time. So right away I went, well, this is okay, isn't it? I've accepted, I've surrendered to the fact that it's going to take time, and I'm actually enjoying it, because all this time I have now I can practice and get better. And so the surrender part was tough, because I kept asking, why is this so hard? When is this going to get any easier? And it really never gets easy. It just gets easier. And if it was to be easy, it wouldn't be so much fun, because if it's too easy, then you'll get bored with it. You know, the puzzle keeps giving me the excitement of finding out new things. This puzzle of the human figure with all its twists and turns is always different, no matter what. If another model hits this pose, it'll be different. You know, the anatomy will be slightly different, the attitude of the artist will be slightly, or the model will be slightly different, and that little slip of the tongue there was relevant too. Another artist will draw this pose, and it'll look different because of their attitude and their likes and wants and the mileage they've put in. You know, every choice they've made in their artistic life has made them draw different marks than I'm drawing right now. And so that's what's wonderful about art, is that we can learn math and everyone comes to the same equation, but you learn art and everyone comes to a different solution and draws a different picture, even if we're all drawing the same figure. Go into any art drawing class and look at all the drawings and see how different they are, and why that's such a great idea, such a brilliant thing. Alright. And so the surrender idea is also the plateau idea. You know, we plateau and we don't learn something for a long time, and it can get frustrating, and we think sometimes we're getting worse. All it is really is we're not surrendering when we feel that. Just surrender and say, okay, this is tricky. There's something I don't know. There's something I'm not good at, and let me practice this now. Let me take the time to practice this. And the minute you've surrendered that idea, your mind will be free, and you'll start to draw with pleasure again, because you've set yourself a little task that's going to be a pleasure rather than a chore. You know, this isn't a job. It is. I'm doing this as a commission. But if I think of it as a job, it'll become a job, and it won't become art. So once I take on any commission or job, I do it for me. And it sounds like it's being selfish, but really, if I did it for the money, then the person that commissioned me would not get the great job that I will give them, because I'm doing it for me. So I'm being selfish for both of us, for myself and for the commissioner. We're both benefiting from the fact that I am enjoying this. And the minute you don't enjoy it, it'll show. If you're bored when you're drawing, it'll look like boring drawing. If you're excited, it'll be exciting. And if you're enjoying it, it'll really show. And I'm really enjoying this. Okay, so looking at overlapping forms here. So thinking about the biceps femoris at the back coming around to attach onto the little fibula bone on the side. So we get an overlap there, a touch. And the pinch of the rib cage here on the pinch side. I'll give us that lovely overlap too. So once I've got all of that stuff in, and you can see from issue 1 why copying photographs is not a good idea. You can see already the life in stage 2 there, in the middle, that is missing somewhat from the photo. You know, if we trace that photo, I mean, it's the life of it is in the fact that Katie has life, and Katie has great abundance for life, and has great style in the way she moves. But Katie would not be able to have so much fluidity that I have in that pose unless she was to hit that pose over and over and over, and I'd get 50 of them and pick the best one, you know, and maybe mishmash a few of the things from each photo together to get that. And that's usually a disaster if you do that with photographs and then trace over the mishmashed photographs. Better to interpret the photograph as I've done there and get all that in one hit and keep that fluid hand going. So now I've stood back. Always stand back at the stage where you've got all your parts in, because we're talking anatomy now. And this is my time now to go over that idea of the tangents as well. So you see how I'm bringing the breast out beyond the rib cage. If you look at Katie again, it's right on it. And then the rib cage coming down as a more of a gestural S down to the hips rather than that straight line on the photograph. So there's our issue 1 strategy of not copying photographs and being very suspicious of them. And like I say, I'm not measuring 8 heads, because I want more rhythm in this. So a lot of artists choose to go one way or the other. Robert McGuinness went 9 heads. Michelangelo went 10, 11 heads long. Frank Frazetta went 7, sometimes 6. And I'm going that way for this picture. I want this smaller, compressed figure to have more fluidity to it. So the longer the figure, the more structural it'll look, the taller the figure. But the more majestic it'll look as well. So there's a trade-off. So I'm choosing a shadow here. It's a tricky shadow because the shadow of one leg on the other, the actual shape of the shadow is killing the form a little. It's making that Katie's right leg, her actual right leg, or to the left as we watch, it's made it look like it's a skinny bowed leg, that shadow. And we gotta be very careful of that. That's in my mind. So I'm getting in close here, and I want to get. I want you to see up close how I'm using this pencil, for instance. And this is where this drawing can get very stiff. But because I've got the gestural lay in there, it should be okay as we go and start blending. So it looks a little stiff at the minute as I put the anatomy in. So I'm reshaping the simple structures of circles and boxes into something a little bit more sophisticated. Now if you're working with just a pencil like that, it can start getting a bit scrappy. So what I do is just soften the edges every once in a while. I don't want to get into that motion where I soften at every pencil mark I make and make a softer mark, or just doing all pencil lines before I soften anything. I just want to feel it naturally. When I feel that it's getting too clumsy and too complicated, just wipe it back a touch with my fingers. So I'm feeling here the iliac crest, where the tendon of the sartorius starts to pull around in a slight curve. That's what we're seeing on that shadowed edge there. And also, it's almost giving us a continuing shadow up onto the box shape of the lower abdominals. So that hip is just a bit lower than that shadow, as it should be, because the lower abdominals ledge should be higher. So knowing those little moments is really important. And I'm over gesturizing these curves based on drawing lots. Always drawing that lower abdominals going in toward the pubic arch and then coming back out again on the pubic mound, and where the leg presses in to the pubic area, getting that lovely little S shape of the rectus femoris fitting in, wedging into the hips. So you've got the rectus femoris wedging in, and just above the hip bone starts. So the leg presses into the body before the top of the hip bone. Got to be aware of that, not into the hip bone. So the tendon of the rectus femoris is underneath the hip crest, not on the hip crest. So coming up to the forearm, always a tricky thing. And also we've got foreshortening here. We've got the foreshortened arm coming toward us, where the biceps and triceps are. Then we've got the forearm going away from us. So we got foreshortening going back and forth. Now I'm going up into the head here, and it's starting to get a little big like I warned before. So I'm going to have to come back and fix that, because the head should really only fit 1 2/3 into the rib cage, and at the minute it's almost the size of the rib cage. So I'm going to have to pull that back. And so, like I say, all these disciplines, we learn them, we know them, we're aware of the traps we can fall into, and yet, would you believe it, we still fall into them. You know, I watch some of the greatest artists work, and they fall into a trap, and they admit it. And I'm warts and all here, because I don't want to be the show-off guy that you see on the internet that is practice and practice their drawing, and then eventually they put up the drawing their best shot at it. Haven't done many shots at it. This is my only shot at this. I want you to see all the problems inherent in it. So you'll often see that. And what happens with those really slick tutorials is they get ahead of themselves. A bit like Groundhog Day. They've done it so many times that they've lost their soul in it. and they're very mechanical as they do it. And the drawing's not that great, but it has no errors in it. Well, no discernible errors, because they've done it so many times. They've worked those errors out, but they've also lost the love for it because they're no longer exploring. They're just tracing over where they'd been before. A bit like a friend I knew on the building site once. Well, I didn't. He wasn't my friend. He was just a colleague on the building site, and he would come in the morning and do the crossword puzzle, and everyone would say, he's really smart, you know. He just never makes an error on that crossword, and he does it in 15 minutes. And one day I came in for a break and lifted up the seat that he'd been sitting on to see if there was any, any magazines or anything that maybe would be in there that I could read. And lo and behold, there was another copy of the newspaper that he had bought. And what he'd been doing is buying 2 copies of the same newspaper every morning before he came to work. He'd do the crossword puzzle, and he'd work it all out, and it was all there. It was all scrappy and scratched out, and he'd obviously been using a dictionary to find things, and he'd worked out the crossword puzzle. And then he came to work with that crossword puzzle worked out and read it all over again. When people come in for their lunch or tea, he'd sit down and open up the fresh new newspaper and do the crossword puzzle, which he'd already worked on. And that's what those tutorials are like. Those tutorials are like that, in that we don't really learn anything from them because there's been no problem solved. They were all worked out and advanced. So, that said, like I say, I'm working warts and all here so that you can see every problem being fixed. And I don't consider them problems. And that's another mindset I use. Miles Davis' quote is, there's no mistakes. What he means by that is every time you make an error, you're actually learning something new. Or it's something you haven't really known or understood. And so errors are just exploration. And I love that. So I've brought the head down a touch there already. I'm going in with the paper stump. And the paper stump, I'm softening the edges of hair, for instance. If you keep hair too sharp, it can look greasy. It can look not like hair. So hair softens near the edges. I'm always aware of that. And one of my favorite paintings by Boris Vallejo when I was growing up was just a stunning picture of a lone warrior, Red Sonja I think it was, and she's just sitting in a canyon, and the sun was lit up through her hair, and the edges of the hair were redder than the center of her hair and softer, and it was just such a beautiful thing. I just never forgot it. The contrast of those soft edges against hard crisp edges of the outer form of the figure were stunning, and it was a revelation to me that all of these edges were different. I'd never considered a difference in any edge because I was looking at comic books, for instance, where every edge is a hard line. And then when I went back to the comic books, the great comic book artists, I realized that wasn't even the case there either, because they'd break up their drawings. Not every line was attached. Just like if you look at that, the arm that's going behind the back, it doesn't actually connect to the hip there. It stops. That's called the lost edge. And so we got all kinds of edges. And we got overlapping lines, and we got thick and thin lines. And that's the difference. In a coloring in book, it's just all black, thick, uniform lines that you fill color in between. And you certainly don't want your drawing to look like a coloring in book, unless it's a commission for a coloring in book. Which I've done. Nightmare. Alright, so here we go with the paper stump, and I want to go outside those edges too, blur the edges. All kinds of different ways to see a line and interpret a line is what makes art. The art of the photography is lovely in itself, but there's no real choice in all of these ideas of line and tone and edge as we see it as artists. It's different. So our job as artists is to interpret the world as we see it and the way we see it, and that's the difference. If we get a series of cameras, Nikon, Canon, or whatever they are, and have them all go off at the same time with Katie posing like this, they'll all give the same result unless you change the settings. So but an artist, put 10 artists there, like I've said, in the art studio, and look at all, you'll wait till you see the difference. Okay, Okay, not to disparage photography, the art of photography. It's definitely art and photography, all right. If I look at the photographs I took when I just had no idea, I was just taking reference photographs compared to the, this one's, for instance, the way it's lit, the way I've directed Katie. Not that she needed much, she was brilliant, but if I just give an emotion, she'll hit it. And for this session, I actually said to Katie, you're the star here. Move from one pose to the other, and I'll just keep shooting. And she was brilliant. It really was one of the most incredible things to watch. So if you are posing models, give them, direction, but don't smother them. And the reason I did that was I know what it's like to be an artist and be art directed into a point where your hands are no longer your own. You're like a puppet on a string, being told to do this. You'll start to believe black's white. If you get over art directed, you just want it to be over. You do whatever they say, a hostage situation. So I knew to give Katie the least amount of direction, which is always what a great art director does, and just stay out of the way then as the artist interprets what I said, and that's what Katie did. So I always see the collaboration of model and artist as a 50-50 thing. I really do. I think Katie is 50% of this art, and I'm the other 50%. If she was a lesser model, I'd have a lesser drawing right now. Okay, so I'm working up close here, and I'm being a little bit more fluid with the tools I'm using. I use my fingers, thumbs, kneadable eraser, paper stump. Using the stump quite a bit here. It's a small area, and when we get into the digastric plane here, it's a very, very tricky area to see, because we normally don't look onto the head like that, because the face looks like a mask from that point. So I've chosen a very tricky pose here, actually, to end this series. It's not tricky in the fact that it's a standing pose. It's tricky in the fact that the foreshortened arm, and to some extent, well, to a lot, the foreshortened head, create a real jumble of problems at that upper part. The lower part of the figure is a simple idea. The stretch side's been sorted out with undulation. The pinch side was never a problem. So the only problem we have really, truly, is that arm and head not looking too weird. Like I said, and many times before, people will accept the photograph no matter how strange it looks, because they'll just go, well, that's what it was. But they won't accept the drawing that way. They'll say, that looks weird, regardless. So I'm very conscious of this, and I want to make sure that it reads without looking weird. And I'm changing the side of this jaw a lot, because it does look, if you look at the photograph, it looks weird. Okay, and it's one of those moments that I have to fix, because no one's going to accept it in a drawing. So I'm going to fiddle with that. And sometimes, well, a lot, when you're drawing, you won't even see the problem that's the problem until it's the problem you're working on. When I first looked at this photograph, I went, there's no problem here, this looks easy. And then as I looked closer, I saw that jaw was a huge problem, especially when you get in close to it. So you'll have one part of your drawing that's going to be more monumental a problem than the other parts, and that's my bugbear right there. We talked about the bugbears before. Well, these bugbears, you see them sometimes, usually the worst of them right up front, but it's those little ones you don't see that can be a real problem. When Frank Frazetta worked on his Egyptian princess, he worked for a day on that face and couldn't get it right, and he sent it to the publishers as it was, because he just couldn't fix it. And they published it the way it was, with the bugbear in it. And he's such a great artist that most people went, wow, it's incredible. And then he took it home, and right away he saw the problem. Fixed it in 10 minutes, he reckoned. I think Frank told a few fibs, but we get the gist. He fixed it very quickly compared to the day he spent not being able to understand how to do it. And he just needed that fresh eye. So the fresh eye will do it. Fresh eye will fix it. 9 times out of 10. So rather than fight a drawing, maybe sometimes it's best to go take a break and come back again. And I usually turn the drawing upside down or look in a mirror, and usually see right away what's the problem. So I'll get a darker pencil out here, So I want to get straight to the heart of the contrast here. So you can see that I want to find the darkest darks in this picture, and the darkest darks is just under that hand. And then I can better judge the highest lights and the midtones from that. So the midtones are the actual color of the flesh, or tone of the flesh. And the darks are going to determine how dark I should make that flesh. So I like to get the darkest darks in pretty soon when it comes to render. And that'll help me better understand the rest. I know Sargent put all the grays in and worked out of those, but I'm sure at some point he had to put that dark in as soon as he was satisfied with the midtones, before he really, blended into them too much. So I'm getting pretty happy now with that mask shape of the jaw. I've moved it around until it reads a little better than it does in the photograph. It's always going to be a problem, but I'm starting to really feel that the top part of that figure now is doing much better than it was a while back there. The beauty of these movies is you can rewind them and have a look at the troubles and the trials and how they were solved as I went. So we were kind of in structural hell there. You remember the three hells: structural, gestural, and render hell. And you don't want to render your way out of hell. Render does tend to soften the mistake, but it's always there for the more educated eye will see that it was a fix-over. So I don't want to render my way out of hell. I want to draw my way out and then render when it's done, when it's fixed. Render should only be the icing on the cake. It shouldn't be the structure of the cake. So that's something to really keep in mind. So I was using a little bit of an eraser there to cut into the figure too, to carve into it, and then soften with the stump. And draw with the eraser as much as erase with it. In fact, I'd say 90% of my erasing work is drawing with the eraser, cutting into the form, making it more refined. So from this angle, looking up, the socket is hidden under the hill of the cheekbone a little bit and gives it that beautiful curve, which is nice. And I like the cat-like nature of it. I'm starting to really enjoy this head now, enjoy how it's working. And it goes back to what I said before, love, devotion, and surrender. I'm loving the challenge. I'm devoting myself to the technique and the discipline of fixing that head, and surrendering to the fact that it's not going to be easy. And with all that in mind, it becomes an easier thing. And it becomes a beautiful thing, because I know now that I've got a drawing that's a little bit different. People will avoid a tricky pose, and so all their poses will be quite pedestrian. And this is now a pose we don't normally see, and that's in that way it's fresh. It's a fresher pose. And just feeling, all of the inherent problems in this, what seemed like a simple pose to begin with, how that shoulder's bent around there, how that neck is creased, all of those, that sternocleidomastoid creased against the collarbone. It's creating kind of a towel-like laundry, twisty set of lines in there. So I want to make sure they're not parallel. That would be be not very gestural. I'm also feeling the shadow just under the breast is a little quick. I'd like to make that a little bigger, perhaps. So the paper stump is knocking back all the complications that I've been working out, and happy now that I've worked out the structure and the anatomy. It's starting to become a nice thing to do, to go down in with the softener, the stump, and knock everything back so that I can go back in again with better line. But I'm not just wiping things back. I'm using this stump to also draw with and refine and make tones better and more gestural all the time. And there I'm drawing a little bit with the kneadable eraser. And you see how I squunch it and squeeze it into different shapes to fit into different little corners. So just really working a lot on that mask of the head, the digastric plane of the head, to make it work. So it's normally in shadow. On this occasion it's in light. So you can see now if you squint, and I squint a lot, so obviously I can't say I'm squinting now. Well, I can, I just did. But I can't show you that. So I'm squinting a lot at the photo, so you should do that too. I've squinted the photo, and by squinting you cut out all the superfluous detail and start to see just the basic shadows and lights. And that helps me a lot in putting down the basic structures. The basic chiaroscuro that we talked about in the last issue. The 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock light source here, northeastern light source. It doesn't have to always be from the northeast, it can be from the northwest. It can be directly above and give us a real sort of cowboy western feel of drop shadows right under the nose. Or from underneath and give us a nightmarish view of someone coming in to a candlelit room. So chiaroscuro light doesn't necessarily mean from one's fixed point. It just means from a fixed point, wherever you choose to place that. So feeling the pinch here of the pectoralis muscle against the deltoids there, because the pectoralis and the deltoids bunch up against each other with a little infraclavicular fossa at the clavicular end, which we're not seeing here. So at the minute they're just bunching up, and with this twist also we're getting more bunch up. So you get a lot of bunch up like that. Tend to take out a few lines, or at least soften some, because we don't want it to look like, even though the body is a twisting form, to look like it's fabric. It can look like that. So I've softened a few of those. I'm doing this with tissue now to make these things softer. There's a lot of shadow in there has complicated the anatomy quite a bit. The way the shadow of the rib cage falling onto the abdominals has changed the anatomy somewhat there. And to the uneducated eye, some people might think that the abdominals and the rib cage are the same thing. So that can happen. So I'm tending to play that down a little bit there. And remember that the nipples, they're being stretched as well, or not. So on the stretch side of the body, the nipple's a different shape than on the pinch side, where the nipple's more rounded. So remember that skin suit that we wear is everything on top of it, eyebrows, lips, they're all going to move and change depending on what's being stretched. So you can see here that I've shortened the legs a little bit here. I've made this more of a traditional woman, more of a pick or a witchy kind of woman. I suppose you can have long skinny witches too, but I tend to think of them as these earth type, very close to the earth characters. And Kitty's very majestic. So I'm just making these legs a little more less majestic, which is unusual. As most people are going for the heroic look. Here I'm going for a gestural, mischievous, even though she might not know it, magical woman, the Stormbringer. So you can see that I've addressed the problem of that shadow on the leg, making it look like a bowed leg, and decided to put it all in shadow. And I'm using the style of omission there as well, by losing the edges all the way inside that shadow. And that's going to give me a gestural S-curve all the way through up to the hip and round to the head. You can imagine a big gestural S going through that body. A reverse S, that is. So just working on the flesh here. I like the flesh to be fleshy. I like it to feel like flesh. And having worked in advertising, they expected flesh to look smoother, which killed the illusion of flesh, ironically. I like to keep my flesh like flesh, with all its folds, and it has a rhythm to it that's lost when we start to fall into that trap of believing that there's such a thing as cellulite, when it's really just how flesh works. Tabloid nonsense. Okay, so working on these lovely tendons that are the lower leg, working on the gastrocnemius calf there, onto the Achilles tendon and the calcaneus of the heel there. That's beautiful stuff. And we have the fibularis longus here. Well, that's what it used to be called. It's now called the peroneus longus for, I don't know, it's a crazy reason for that. Fibularis makes much more sense. It runs down the fibula. And so that tendon goes right under the foot and gives us a line underneath the ankle, that is, and gives us this beautiful line. And also we have at the front there, you always see the tibialis anterior muscle giving us a little curve on the front. So make sure that you don't make the shin bone too straight. So that little muscle I'm doing for underneath the foot there is the abductor digiti minimi muscle. Mini-me, there you go. The adductor muscle of the foot. You know, it's basically moving the foot back and forth. So abduct means to take away from the body, to kidnap something. So you can see those beautiful tendons all the way down there, with the gastrocnemius is going in behind the tendon of the biceps femoris. I don't want it to be too much of a tangle there, so I've broken the line, as you can see there. So we're talking about style right there at that point, behind the knees. So a lot of tanglement going up there, a lot of tendinous business going on, and I just love it. It gives us so much rhythm. And you also see a little lump just after the ankle that sometimes trips people up into looking like a bruise or a broken ankle or a second ankle, which is the extensor digitorum, the brevis. So brevis means a smaller version of another muscle. So the digitorum muscle comes down the shin, and the brevis is the smaller extension of that. Well, not really an extension, but it's underneath. So the brevis are close to each other. You get longus and brevis muscles next to each other, helping each other out. Little and large, little helper friends. So now I'm really happy with the style action coming on here now from all the decisions I made earlier. So the more decisions we make at the early stages, as far as style and rhythm goes, really benefit later when we put the actual last part of style on top, which is the rhythm of tone, the thinning of lines, the thickening of other lines, the breaking of edges. You can see I'm using the eraser there to get just more push and pinch and pull and rhythm out of the flesh as I can, and really enjoying it. And you can see that I've lightened up the shadow under the breast, and all these little decisions that I'm making are deviating off the photograph to the point where the photograph no longer lives as a companion to the picture. It's a different thing now. We talked about that before. Separate lives. This drawing now has a separate life from that photo. That photo is now a reference image that's been mostly discarded in favor now of line and tone as the main attraction. You know, we don't have line in the photograph. We have tone, naturally, but we don't have all the rhythms and all the line flow that comes from making micro decisions along the way, until we end up with something that's art, something that can only be a drawing. This can never be mistaken for a photograph. It may look, it has some photographic stylized moments in it, but there's nothing photographic about this drawing. And if it was photographic, I would see to it that it doesn't look that way by adding more line or taking out some edges or doing something to kill the illusion that, or kill the reality that we worked from a photograph. So I don't want this to be a copy of a photograph. I was long-winded about that, but I'm very passionate about it. So all these beautiful moments are all coming from those decisions. You know, we've got extra twist, we've got extra rhythm, we've got extra everything really in this drawing, and which is terrific because we already started with a magnificent abundance of gesture and life in the actual pose that Katie gave us. So I couldn't lose, really. Katie gave us such a beautiful start. I couldn't lose. So even as I'm smudging here, I'm smudging with rhythm. I'm chasing these rhythms down the body. And rhythms go down the body. The minute we start going across the body, we sort of kill rhythm. So we've got to be very careful of that. And here I'm going in with my detail hand, rare to see, because I'm doing detail. At that point, very tricky moment here with the tricep. Really curves right into the deltoid there. And you see I've added some moments such as that bracelet to break up that arm that's coming toward us, and also by putting that bracelet in, it shows us the contour of the arm going away from us. It helps us to see that that's a foreshortened arm, and now it no longer looks as weird as it did in the reference. So that's a little, I won't call it a trick. It was a solution to a problem, and it helped also that it was jewelry, which I like to draw on figures. I like the contrast of jewelry against flesh. So I felt the shadow was too dark, and so I'm coming in with the chamois just to kill it back a little bit. And so these are the moments where you go, what's right for the drawing, regardless of what was right for the photo. What now is the right thing for this drawing, and ignore the photo. I'm not looking at the photo at this point. I don't want to. If I do, I'll be influenced by it too much. And you see how much I've killed the shadow along the torso, all the way through the torso. That shadow is just too dark for me, and I want to take the idea of the legs being darker and draw our light up into the central focus of the body, as we discussed in the chiaroscuro demonstration. How to play with light, how to compose with light, as well as to compose with line and tone. So you can see all the stylizations coming together here, the lost edges, the thick and thin lines, the gesture. Look at the light as well, how beautiful it is to fade that arm into the hip there, that omission. Going back to that idea that Boris Vallejo, when he sowed that seed with the hair having a soft edge, I'm taking it further there and saying it doesn't have to be hair, it can be an arm that fades off, even within the body. Usually we'll get a misty mountain before we see that kind of omission of detail. But we're artists, we can do anything we want, and I've decided to do that. And when you become bold, emboldened, then your art will have an authority to it that an amateur artist work won't, where they're trying to copy all the time, believing the canon is getting as close to the reference as possible. If anything, I'm trying to get away from the reference as much as possible, while still using the reference. The reference is beautiful. If I tried to get away from the reference completely, I'd draw a pineapple or a banana. It's still the figure, which is what I love to draw. But I want to draw it my way. I want to show my view of the beauty that I saw here. So for very stylistic leanings here, I want to get some texture in this. I want to echo the flow of this figure the way I see it. That reverse S I was talking about, that's how I see the flow through this figure. I want to go up through those legs and all the way around to the top of the head with this compressed charcoal. I just feel that flow, and you see how much movement that gives the entire figure now. If we just threw that charcoal all over the place and hope for the best, it'll be a big mess. We'll just completely fix it up and change it, and it'll be a nightmare of hoping and guessing. The Command Z of art, where you're hoping for something to happen rather than making it happen. And I'm making this happen by following the contours of the figure in a ghostly fashion throughout. And there was the moment there of feeling that reverse S that gives the energy, the gestural energy of the original drawing. And that's what I saw when I drew stage 2 in the middle there. I saw that magical which is called in animation called the line of action. It's showing us how this whole thing is the whole body is turning and torquing in that flow. There's that flow there. So over these 8 weeks, we've explored many things, and there's many more things to explore. And if you want to explore further with me, I've written, of course, my new book, The Figures from Life. It goes really quite into depth there with hundreds of pages. I hope you can join me for that, because there's never enough time. But what's great is hanging out with you guys after the magazine article is written, and just talk further about the actual drawing of it, and revisiting the drawing myself. And I recommend recording your work as well. It helps you see the errors of your ways, and also what you can learn from those errors. And once again, they're not really errors, they're just better ways of seeing things. Like, for instance, when I'm doing this, I really could have left it at that. There's a lot of life in that was lost later in the drawing. I mean, I think right here we could have finished that, but there was too many things still left to be fixed, and unfortunately we lose some good stuff, and we gain some good stuff along the way. I feel that these strokes I'm making here should have been left as they were, and you can see what I mean there. So I've changed them around, and actually lost some of the life in the doing of it. But nobody's the wiser except for us, you know. People will only see this finished product except for, me and you watching the progress of it. For the rest of the world, they just see this, so they never know. I once heard someone say that they watched the Rolling Stones record an album, and they said they completely ruined it. If they'd have left the album halfway through, they would have had the masterpiece of a century. But to us, the world, it was a masterpiece. The album, whatever one it was, from this guy's eyes. And he actually said they have no idea how to make music. How strange. But I know what he meant. They worked it over. They worked it to the point where they could have left it in an earlier stage and it would have been better. But they were so brilliant that even the stage that we got was still a masterpiece. But it would have been great to hear what he was talking about. So here I am. Like I say, yeah, we lost something in that, but we gained a hell of a lot more. I mean, that breast now is much better. All of this stuff that I'm putting in now is a huge improvement compared to the steps before. That hard line of the drop shadow under the arm really anchors that arm. We feel it, and that the decisions of the overlapping forms on the stretch side of the figure where the breast overlaps the rib cage, all great decisions in my opinion. I really feel I made the right choices there. That little highlight there on the pubic mound, that's what we usually see, and it's missing from the photographic reference. And it helps give us that dimension and that puffiness. And we got the tendon of the rectus femoris going up to underneath the hip bone there, showing much better. And that's from learning the anatomy. That's the devotion to practice that gives me the opportunity to put that in with authority. So the love, devotion, and the surrender, the fact that it's going to be hard, all coming into play right now. And so that extra little bit of energy above the head there, even though we lost the gestural lines, that little bit of energy in that tone is beautiful too. It's that Rolling Stones moment. We still get good stuff. Nobody's any the wiser that there could have been a better opportunity that was lost in the beautiful gestural charcoal lines that we get rid of. Well, I get rid of. I'm blaming it on you guys. But you know what? The great thing is that there are no mistakes. Even though I feel that I should have left that, you know what? I'm going to use it again in a different drawing. And this time I won't take it too far. So nothing's lost. Nothing's lost. Even this light, longer shadow I'm doing under the breast here. Remember earlier that I felt that shadow was too close to the breast and echoed the breast too closely to the point where it looked more like a cutout. Now it's longer, it's more gestural, and it reads much better in a lighter tone. careful not to draw the nipples as well as, a continuous hard line. You see how much more beautiful that is now. And look at the contrast between both nipples. One's in the dark and one's in the light. And like I said earlier, the shapes are different. One's being stretched on the stretch side, and this breast is more rounded because it's more in its more natural state. The outside of the breast is less compressed than the inside because it's coming off the rib cage. So coming to the close now, and I really enjoyed drawing this drawing. Like all drawings, it had its challenges, but that's what made it interesting for me, the challenges. I don't want it to be easy. I want it to be a beautiful puzzle so that I can solve. Not like that crossword puzzle where it's all about the result. For me, it's all about the get in there. If it's all about just the result, then you've lost that idea of surrendering, like that guy did with the crossword puzzle. He wasn't surrendering at all. He wanted to win. He was binary. And if you're in the binary mode where it's good or bad, or you win or lose, it's not art. Art is about the gray areas, about the, what makes things interesting is not the this or that. It's the in-betweens. What is it that's different in this? And it's sometimes the oddest poses that are most interesting, rather than the correct pose and the correct form. It's the anomalies that interest me, the strangeness. I'm loving that oddness of the gluteus maximus just disappearing behind the thicker thigh there. We don't see it in the photograph, but I know it's there, and so I put it in, and it just makes me happy to have seen it and done it. So art to me is a joy. So remember those disciplines. You love your art. We can all do that, right? We're artists. We can devote ourselves to the practice and discipline of it, and enjoy that. Well, the main thing to remember is enjoy the discipline. Don't see it as others see discipline, where it's a chore. Enjoy the fact that you're getting better with practice. So you love it, you practice it, and you enjoy that practice, and that's your devotion. And you surrender yourself to the fact that all of that practice is the joy of it. It's not the get into the end that's important. It's not that binary win or lose. It's that total involvement in art where you're enjoying the practice, the love and the devotion all at once. This isn't about getting somewhere. We are there. This is it right now. Okay, so coming to the absolute final moments here, the last touches on the last drawing in the last issue. It sounds a little sad, but it's been wonderful. It's been a great experience, and I've really enjoyed drawing for you, and hopefully I'll see you along the way somewhere. I'd like to thank also ImagineFX magazine for this great opportunity. It has been a wonderful opportunity to draw over such a long timeline, really, and reach so many people. I especially like to thank Claire Howlett. She's just wonderful. I remember that first email exchange based on this idea, and here we are 8 issues later. So we're a small herd, guys. Hopefully I'll see you somewhere in a workshop, one of the workshops I teach here in Australia. Perhaps you're in Australia, or online at CGMA where I teach internationally, or even just on Facebook, or any of the events that I might be attending. We usually bump into each other, us artists. We're that kind. So I'm off to LuxCon now in the US, and I'll leave you to your own art adventures.